And I want to thank the Social Democrats for bringing this motion. And outside of housing, health and climate change, this is the topic I've spoken most on since I was elected in February 2016. I'm not sure how many more motions I can participate. Not because I won't be elected or elected, that's not the question, in relation to just standing here repeating figures over and over again and the failure to act. I acknowledge the progress made in terms of legislation. I acknowledge that we now have a third national strategy that aims for zero violence, zero tolerance of violence. I acknowledge that there's a permanent agency. I welcome all of that. However, my frustration is just not containable, really, when I look back on my own life, and I had the privilege of working in the area of psychology and that. And I looked at the Kilkenny incest case back in the mid-80s, where the judgment, part of the judgment was the violence, which was appalling in that case, wasn't unusual for the area. Then in 97, 96, 97, the former Minister Edna Fitzgerald produced a detailed report. I referred to this when I spoke in another motion. And the terms of reference were broad, an excellent report, and it set out exactly. And one of the main things that jumped out, examine rehabilitation programmes for perpetrators of such crimes, make recommendations for a comprehensive preventative strategy. 96, 97, Minister. Fast forward then to 2001, we got the Savvy report. Absolutely mind-boggling figures of the prevalence of sexual violence and all types of violence, predominantly against women. Then, over my time in the Dáil, we begged and appealed for that Savvy to be updated. It took almost 20 years, and finally we get the CSO to do theirs. And here we are again, motion after motion. Really, what we should be doing is having a debate led by yourselves in terms of how well you're implementing the strategy. And to be in the 21st century with not enough refuges, to be in 9 counties, none at all, and to be in the 21st century where we're still looking at prevalence of sexual and violence against women, and indeed some men and children, is simply just appalling, and the consequences for participation in society are just not possible when women are subjected to that level of violence, and indeed children are children watching it. So we're here today looking at and paying tribute to Natasha O'Brien, and rightly so, and Bláthnaid Raleigh, who waived her anonymity, and the Women of Honour, and then the recent judgment of the suspended sentence. Now, what struck me about the suspended sentence, and I agree with what a lot has been said, but that it was that suspended sentence that prodded the review and the appointment of Peter Ward. Nothing was happening proactively from the Defence Forces, and that's a huge difficulty. Nothing happening proactively. Now, we have protective units set up, the Garda protective units, ostensibly since 2015. I welcome that. What's the review of those units? What's the feedback to the Minister? Are they operating? Have they enough resources? We have a domestic violence group on the ground in Galway, Oughterard, Mike Cullen, struggling for money. Last year, we know, and it's been repeated, 40,048 disclosures of abuse made to Women's Aid. Thanks be to God we have Women's Aid, who have pushed all of us to highlight this topic over and over again. But at what stage do we say zero tolerance means zero tolerance? And to do that, we need to deal with the perpetrators. And there was an excellent programme in Galway, led, unfortunately, following the death of Manuel O'Rido in 2007. And in conjunction with the Galway Rape Crisis Centre Minister, they went into schools in transition years. A wonderfully successful project, but it was a pilot project, never repeated, never resourced. And then I talked to various people and young people in terms of violence. And the thing that jumped out from listening to them was the embarrassment and shame that's embedded in the woman, embedded in them, when the shame should be on the perpetrator and the system for failing. And so the low level of reporting is because women don't have faith in the system. Although ostensibly and theoretically we've improved the systems, there's still shame embedded, no place to go and no trust. And we know that over and over again. And so when we're paying tribute to the women who have waived anonymity and have come forward, 50 years has gone by since Scream Quietly or The Neighbours Will Hear, 1974. I ask you to search out that book and read it. Scream Quietly or The Neighbours Will Hear, a seminal book at the time, highlighting how things were done or not done, and women screaming in silence. We're no longer doing it in silence, but our role here today is to ensure that the third national strategy is actually implemented in time, and that refuges are built for the purpose of being multifunctional, because we should reach the stage where we don't need them. So they should be built with a multifunctional and a future use approach. That's what we should be working towards. Training Gardaí, obviously training the judiciary, and obviously having consistent sentences. I'll finish on that, thank you. But consistent sentencing was identified in the task force back in '96.